Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
When Jesus heard about John, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. When the crowds learned of this, they followed him on foot from the cities. When Jesus arrived and saw a large crowd, he had compassion for them and healed those who were sick. That evening his disciples came and said to him, "This is an isolated place and it's getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "There's no need to send them away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here except 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." He said, "Bring them here to me." He ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish, looked up to heaven, blessed them, and broke the loaves apart and gave them to his disciples. When the disciples gave them to the crowds, everyone ate until they were full, and they filled 12 baskets with the leftovers. About 5,000 men, plus women and children, had eaten. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
May God's word be spoken and God's word be heard. Amen. In July, our Gospels called us to an internal, contemplative, spiritual examination, to look at ourselves and see what kind of soil are we, to look within ourselves and say what kind of seed has been planted within us. And then, last week, to make a decision about the kingdom of heaven. What is it worth to you? What is the kingdom of heaven worth to you? Because in the kingdom of heaven, as we read in the Old Testament prophet this morning, God is gracious and generous to everyone. God wants everyone to have what they need. Now, our gospel starts out with Jesus receiving some bad news. John has been beheaded. John has been tricked. And John has been beheaded. And so Jesus goes off by himself to a lonely place, probably to grieve, to mourn the loss of his cousin, his good friend, the predecessor of his ministry. But a crowd finds out where he is and they come because they want him to continue to work. No day off for Jesus, no time to mourn. We need you. And out of compassion, he goes anyway, and he heals them, and he listens to them. But it gets late, and they're in the middle of nowhere. So the disciples come to Jesus. Now here is a clue in the Gospel of Matthew. Remember, Matthew is telling us how we personally grow as Christians. But his main message is, what does it mean to be the church? So whenever the disciples come to Jesus, we should listen up, because he's talking about the church. The church is the disciples. The disciples come to Jesus and say, "You better send them away now. They need to eat." And Jesus says, "There's no need to do that. You take care of it yourself." Whoa. You do it this time. We are called to follow. We are called to follow Jesus' example. And in this morning's gospel is where Jesus shifts the focus from, okay, you've seen what I do. Now you start doing it. It's your turn, he says to the disciples. It's your turn, he says to the church. You feed them. You show God's compassion. You show God's mercy. And they're like, have you seen our budget? We don't have much. 5 little loaves of bread and 2 tiny little fish. We don't have enough to keep the soup kitchen running. We don't seminary student, we only have 5 loaves, 2 fish, the 12 of us can barely eat off of that. Can you hear them saying that? That's what they say to Jesus. We don't have enough. But what does Jesus do? Now, in this gospel, we don't have the let those who have ears to hear, let them hear, or open your eyes and watch, because by now, everyone studying this gospel has heard it enough times that you almost insert it yourself. Or you should. Jesus is about to act now and respond. So in there are these little, we should be saying to ourselves, wake up, pay attention, watch what he does, because he's going to show us something important. And the first thing we notice about what Jesus does is that he doesn't say, oh gee, you know, you're right, that's really not very much. What can we possibly do with 5 loaves and 2 fish? Jesus says nothing negative. He doesn't enter the attitude of sparsity, the attitude of poverty, the attitude of want. Jesus doesn't go there. Jesus knows the generosity of God. He knows his Father owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, the wealth in every mine. And so he takes what he's given without complaining. He doesn't say, well, you know, no, if we did a barbecue, I bet we'd get someone to donate the chicken and the bowls, and we could do a fundraiser right now and come up with enough money to take these people back to town and take them out to a nice restaurant. He doesn't say that. He believes and he trusts the generosity of God, and what is given to him is more than enough. He doesn't scold them. He doesn't say, go back and take up another offering. I'm sure out of these 5,000 people, if you pass the plate, you're going to find more food and then we'll all share it. He takes what is given to him. That's the first thing to learn from Jesus. The second thing we learn from what Jesus does is he blesses it. He blesses what is given to him. This is not a mere little, oh yeah, he says grace. He doesn't say grace. He doesn't say thanks. He doesn't say Jesus gave thanks for the bread. He blesses the bread. He blesses the bread. Do we do that? Do we take our 5 little loaves and our 2 fish and bring them to Jesus and bless them first? Before we take them out, bless them. We do the offering plate every Sunday. Absolutely. I bless that. Every little bit. The first step is to offer it up to God and bless it before it is given out. And the next thing he does is breaks it. He reduces it even further. He breaks it up from what it is into smaller bits. He takes the little bit of fish and the little bit of bread that he's given and he breaks it into smaller pieces and then distributes it. So he takes it without talking about its sparsity. He blesses it and then he breaks it up into parts before he gives it out. He gives it back to them after it has been broken and says, now distribute it. Now distribute it. I think the lesson's pretty clear. Whatever little bit we have, by resources, by people, by whatever, is to be brought to Jesus without focusing on the sparsity. Blessing it, breaking it up into its parts, and sending it out. Now there's one other little interesting piece of information in this gospel. Jesus commands something. We rarely hear about Jesus commanding or ordering things, except to his disciples. This commandment I give you to love one another. Right? But he commands the people, sit down. Sit down. Rest. He doesn't ask them to work for it. He doesn't say, now line up. He doesn't say, well, if you sign in for this ministry, then we will give you what you need. We're going to take a survey to see who needs more, what kind of family structure you have. No. To the people who are to receive, he simply says, rest. Rest. The focus is always the compassion for them. Sit on the grass. Rest. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. My disciples are going to take care of you. My disciples are going to take care of you. I think this is an interesting lesson this morning in our gospel. Matthew is now same compassion that God shows for the world. We should show the same compassion that Jesus showed